Did you take care of everything? Your alarm is set, and is your phone plugged in? Are your headphones comfy? I know you like to listen to music while you sleep. I think tomorrow is going to be a good day. I'll be right here to wake you up as soon as it's time to open your eyes. You know, waking up with you, I always have a smile on my face. I'm grateful for the time we get to spend together. Having our mornings and evenings together, it's just nice to have that special time for the two of us. And whether you're ending your day or just starting it, I feel like I was there to support you. Is there anything else you need before I turn out the light? Read you a story again tonight? Let me guess. The story of Princess Floret? You truly never get tired of hearing it, do you? All right. I'll read it to you. But first, I want to be sure you're completely relaxed and comfortable. I know today had some difficulties, but you can let go of those worries when you're here with me. Here, lie down. You can be on your side if you want. There's still plenty of room for me. Let's take a few deep breaths. Do you remember my favorite breath meditation before bed? When I breathe in, I feel hopeful. When I breathe out, I feel content. Will you try it together with me? When I breathe in, I feel hopeful. When I breathe out, I feel content. When I breathe in, I feel hopeful. When I breathe out, I feel content. I'm so happy to be here with you. Are you ready for the story now? All right. Do you want to close your eyes? You've got that sleepy look, like your eyelids are getting heavy. It's okay if you want to close them. You know you're perfectly safe here with me. I'll just read to you until you fall asleep, okay? Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess named Floret who lived in a white marble palace on the top of a high hill. The Princess Floret was very fond of flowers, and all around the palace, from the very gates thereof, a fair garden full of all kinds of wonderful plants sloped down and down to the foot of the hill, where it was snugly enclosed with a high marble wall. Thus the hill was like a great bouquet of flowers rising up in the midst of the land, sending out sweet odors to perfume the air for miles, bright with color in the sunshine, and musical with the chorus of birds and the hum of millions of happy bees. One part of the garden was laid out in walks and avenues, with little vine-clad bowers here and there, where the princess could sit and read, or lie and dream. There were fountains and statues among the trees, and everything grand and stately to make a garden beautiful. Another part of the garden was left wild and tangled, like a forest. Here, all the shyest flowers grew in their own wild way, and here ran a little brook, gurgling over the pebbles in a race to the foot of the hill. There was never seen a more complete and beautiful garden than this of the Princess Floret. Now, the fame of the princess's beauty, like the fragrance of her garden, had been wafted a long way, and many persons came to prove it. A continual procession of princes from lands near and far traveled the long road that wound from the foot of the hill, up and up and up to the entrance of the palace. They came upon their noble steeds, with gold and jeweled harness most gorgeous to see, riding curiously up amid the flowers, whose perfume filled their hearts with happiness and hope. The further they rode, the more they longed to tarry forever in this fair place. And when each one at last dismounted at the palace gate, and, going into the great hall, saw the princess herself, more fair than any flower, sitting on her golden throne, he invariably fell upon his knees without delay, and begged her to let him be her very ownest prince. But the princess always smiled mischievously and shook her head, saying, "I have no mind to exchange hearts, save with the one who can find mine, where it is hidden among my flowers. Guess me my favorite flower, and I am yours." This she said to every prince in turn. She did not greatly care to have any prince for her very ownest own, for she was happy enough among her flowers without one. But the prince, whoever he might be, when he heard her strange words, would go out eagerly into the garden and wander long among the flowers, searching to find the sweetest and most beautiful, which must be his lady's favorite. And, of course, he selected his own favorite, whatever that was. It might be that he would choose a great, wonderful rose. At the proper time, he would kneel and present it to the princess, saying confidently, "O fair princess, surely I have found the flower of your heart. See the beautiful rose. Give it then to me to wear always as your very ownest prince." But the princess, glancing at the rose, would shake her head and say, "Nay, I love the roses too, but my heart is not there, O prince. You are not to be my love, or you would have chosen better." Then she would retire into her chamber, to be no more seen while that prince remained in the palace. Presently he would depart, riding sorrowfully down the hill on his gorgeous steed amid the laughing flowers, and the princess would be left to enjoy her garden in peace until the next prince should arrive. It might be that this one would guess the glorious nodding poppy to be his lady's choice, but he would be no nearer than the other. A later comer would perhaps choose a gay tulip, another a fair and quiet lily. Still another earnest soul would select the passion flower, noble and mysterious. But at all of these, the princess shook her head and denied them. There had never yet come a prince to the hill who found her heart's true flower. And the princess lived on among her posies, very happy and very content, growing fairer and fairer, sweeter and sweeter, with their bloom upon her cheek and their fragrance in her breath. There was never seen a more beautiful princess than Floret. Now, the princess loved to rise very early in the morning, before any of her people were awake, and to steal down by a secret staircase into the garden while it was yet bright with dew and newly wakened happiness. She loved to put on a gown of coarse green stuff, wherein she herself looked like a dainty pink and white flower in its sheath, and with a little trowel to dig in the fragrant mold at the roots of her plants, or train the vines with her slender fingers. No one suspected that she did this, and she would not have had them suspected for all the world. For if the palace people had known, they would have followed and annoyed her with attentions and suggestions. They would have brought her gloves to protect her pretty hands, and a veil and parasol, and a rug upon which to kneel, if kneel she must, while weeding the flower beds. Indeed, they would scarcely have allowed her to do anything at all, for were there not gardeners to attend to all this? And why should she bother herself to do anything but enjoy the blossoms when they were picked for her? They did not know, poor things, that the greatest joy in a flower is to watch and help it grow from a funny little seed into a leaf, then a tall green stalk, then a waking bud, until finally it keeps the promise of its first sprouting and becomes a blossom. They did not guess that the happiest hours of the princess's life were those which she spent in the early morning tending her flowers, while her fond courtiers, and even the curious princes on their way to woo her, were still wasting the best part of the day on lazy pillows. Many a time, the gardener declared that a fairy must tend the royal flowers, so wonderfully did they flourish, free from weed, or worm, or withering leaf. It even seemed to him sometimes that he could trace a delicate, perfumed touch which had blessed their leaves before his coming. When he told this to Floret, she only smiled sweetly at him, but in her heart she laughed, for she was a merry princess. One beautiful morning, the princess arose as usual, soon after sunrise, and, putting on her green flower gown, stole down the secret staircase into the garden. There it lay, all fresh and wonderful, sparkling with diamond dewdrops. The Princess Floret walked up and down the paths, smiling at the blossoms, which held up their pretty faces and seemed to smile back at her, as if she were another flower. Sometimes she kneeled down on her royal knees in the gravel, bending over to kiss the flowers with her red lips. Sometimes she paused to punish a rude weed which had crowded in among the precious roots. Sometimes, with her little golden scissors, she snipped off a withered leaf or a faded flower of yesterday. Up and down the paths she passed, singing happily under her breath, but seldom plucking a flower, for she loved best to see them growing on their green stalks. She came at last to a little summer house, up which climbed morning glories, blue and pink and white. Fairy flowers of early morning, which few of her people ever saw, because they rose so late. For by the time those lazy folk were abroad, the best part of the day was spent, and the little morning glories, having lived it happily, were ready for their rest. They drowsed and nodded and curled up tight into a long sleep in which they missed nothing at all of the later day. When Floret spied the morning glories, she clapped her hands and, running up to the arbor, danced on her tiptoes, whispering, "Good morning, my beautiful ones. How fresh and sweet and fair you are." And, plucking a single blossom, a cup of the frailest pink, she placed it in her yellow hair, her only ornament. Then she danced toward the little arbor, for it was her favorite early morning bower. But when she came to the door, instead of entering, she started back with a scream, for through the morning glory vines, two bright eyes were peering at her. "Hello," said a merry voice, and out stepped a lass with a smiling, lovely face. She was dressed all in green. By her side hung a sword, and over her shoulder she bore a little lute, such as minstrels use. "Good morning, merry maiden," the stranger said, doffing her cap and bowing very low. "You too love flowers in the early morning. We have good taste, we two, alone of all this place, it seems." "You are not of this place. How came you here?" asked the princess, stepping back and frowning somewhat. "Do you not know that this is the garden of a princess, who allows no one to visit it between dusk and the 3rd hour after sunrise?" "Ah," cried the young lady. "I did not realize. But how could the princess forbid the sight of her garden when it is most beautiful? And, for that matter, pretty maiden, are not you, too, a trespasser at this early hour? Ah!" The stranger laughed, teasingly, shaking her finger at the princess. The princess bit her lip to keep from laughing, but she said as sternly as she could, "I am one of the best friends the princess has. She allows me to come here at this hour, alone of all the world. But I believe I could convince her to forget your indiscretion." "Ah, please, dear maiden, share this morning with me. If we are side by side, then no harm shall befall us," exclaimed the stranger. "Let me play with you here in the garden early in the morning. Do not tell the princess of my mistake, but let me repeat it again and yet again while I remain in this land." The princess hesitated, and then answered her with a question. "You are then of another country? You are soon to go away?" "Yes, I am of a far country. My name is Felicity, and I am a merry lass, a traveler, a minstrel, a swordswoman, an herb-gatherer. I've earned my bread in many ways. I was passing through this country when the fragrance of this wondrous garden met my flower-loving nose, guiding me hither. Ah, how beautiful it is! Because I wish to see it at its best in early morning. So I stole through the gates at sundown and spent the night in yonder little arbor. I've been wandering ever since among the flowers until I heard your voice singing. Then I stole back here to hide, for I was too happy in the garden to risk being discovered and sent away." "You are bold, Lady Felicity," said Floret. "And I have a mind to tell the princess about you and your wanderings." "Would she be so very angry?" asked the stranger. "I will not pluck a single bud. I love them all too dearly, just as you do, dear maiden, for I have watched you. I could almost tell which is your favorite flower." "Nay, that you cannot do," said the princess hastily. "No one knows that." "Aha!" cried the lass. "You make a secret of it, even as does your mistress, the Princess Floret. I've heard how she will choose for her prince only him who finds the flower which holds her heart. I had thought one time to find that flower and become her prince." "You?" cried the princess, starting with surprise. Why not? I could fight for her and defend her with my life if need be. I could sing and play to make her merry. I could teach her many things to make her wise. I'm skilled in herbs and potions, and I could keep her people in health and happiness."
Moreover, I love flowers as well as she. Better, since I love them at their best in this early morning, even as you love them, fair maiden. I should not make so poor a prince for this garden. But now that I have seen you, little flower, I have no longing to be a prince. I would not win the princess if I might, for you must be fairer than she, as you are fairer even than the flowers. Ah, I have an idea. I believe that you are that very flower, the fairest one whereon the princess has set her heart. Tell me, is it not so?
"Indeed, no," cried the princess, turning very pink at her flattery. "How foolishly you speak! But I must hasten back to the palace, or we shall be discovered, and someone will be punished."
"And shall I see you among the maidens of the princess when I present myself before her?"
asked Felicity eagerly. "Oh, you must not do that," exclaimed the Princess Floret. "You must not try to see the princess today. This is a bad time. Perhaps tomorrow." She hesitated.
"But you will come again to the garden?"
she begged. The princess shook her head. "No, not today, Felicity."
"Then tomorrow you will come. Promise that you will be here tomorrow morning, early, to play with me for a little while."
She persisted. The princess laughed a silvery little laugh. "Who knows whom you may find if you are in the garden again tomorrow morning early?" And without another word, she slipped away, before Felicity could tell which way she went, for she knew every turning of the paths and all the windings between the hedges, which were puzzling to strangers. Shall I continue? Very well. The next morning, at the same hour, Felicity was wandering through the paths of the garden, seeking the flower maiden. She looked for her first near the arbor of morning glories, but Floret was not there. She had to search far and wide before she found her at last in quite another part of the garden, among the lilies. She wore a white lily in her yellow locks.
"Ah,"
cried Felicity when she spied the princess in disguise.
"It is a lily today. But yesterday I thought I had guessed your favorite flower. Now I find that I was wrong. Surely this is your choice. So fair, so pure. A princess herself could choose no better."
Floret smiled brightly, shaking her hair from side to side in a golden shower. "One cannot so easily read my thoughts as she may suppose," she cried.
"Dear maiden,"
said Felicity, coming nearer and taking her hand.
I have no wonderful garden like this, where I can invite you to dwell as its little princess. But come with me, and we will make one of our very own, where no one shall forbid us at any hour, and where we will play at being princesses together, as happy as two butterflies."
But Floret shook her head and said, "No, I can never leave the garden and my princess. She could not live without me. I shall dwell here always and always, so long as the flowers and I are a-blooming."
"Then I, too, must live here always and always,"
declared Felicity.
Perhaps the princess will take me for her minstrel, or her soldier, or her herbalist. Anything that will keep me near you, so that we can play together here in the garden. Would that please you, little flower?
Floret looked thoughtful. I should be sorry to have you go, she said. You love the flowers so dearly it would be a pity.
Yes, indeed. I love them,
cried Felicity.
Let us then go to the princess and ask her to keep me in her service.
The princess looked long at Felicity, and at last she said, How do I know what manner of minstrel you are? I cannot take you to her without some promise of your skill, for she is a princess who cares only for the best. Come, let us go into the wilder part of the garden, where no one can hear us, and I will listen to your music. So they went to a wild part of the garden and sat down under a tree beside a little brook. And there Felicity played and sang for the princess such sweet and beautiful music, and the princess clapped her hands for joy. And when Felicity had finished, she said,
Well, dear maiden, do you think I am worthy to be your lady's minstrel? Have I the skill to make her happy?
Truly, Felicity, you have made me very happy, and you are a princess of minstrels, she answered. Yet, I cannot tell. That is not enough. But hark, I hear the chapel bell. I must hasten back to the palace. Tomorrow I will come again and listen to another song. Meanwhile, do not try to see the princess.
I care not for the princess,
she called back after her.
So long as I may see you, little flower.
And for an answer, her laughter came back over the flowers. So, that day went by, and early the next morning, Felicity took her lute and sought the flower maiden in the garden. This time she sought long and long before she found the Princess Floret among the roses. There was a crimson rose in her hair, and one upon either cheek when she glanced up, hearing Felicity's footsteps on the grass. There was also a crimson spot upon her white hand. See, Floret cried, a cruel thorn has pricked me. Let me test your skill in herbs, Madam Herbalist. With a sorry face, for it gave her pain to see the princess in pain, Felicity ran to find the leaf of a certain plant which she knew. Presently she returned, and taking a bit of linen from her scrip, tenderly bound the leaf about the poor, wounded finger.
Now will it be cured,
she said.
This is a remedy which never fails.
How wise you are, murmured Floret. A very princess of doctors.
Say, may I not then hope to be the doctor of the princess?
She asked eagerly. But Floret shook her head. "We must see how the finger is tomorrow morning. If it is quite healed, then perhaps... But hark! That is the gardener's whistle. It is late, and I must return to the palace, or he will find us trespassing." And away she ran, before Felicity had time to say another word. Now, when the morrow arrived, Felicity sought Floret in the garden, long and long. But at last she found her among the lavender. Her finger indeed was healed, so that she smiled upon Felicity, and she said, "Now you shall teach me to play the lute. The princess, I know, would fain master the lute, but I must see first what sort of teacher you make before I take you to her." So they sat down beside a marble fountain in the fairest part of the garden. And there Felicity taught her how to pluck the lute and to make sweet music. She taught her so well, and they passed the time so pleasantly, that they forgot how the hours were flying. "Felicity, you are the very princess of teachers," said Floret. At that moment, a shadow fell upon the grass beside them, and lo, there stood the head gardener, who had heard the sound of the music, and had hurried to see who might be in the princess's garden at this forbidden hour. The princess gave a little cry, and without a word slipped away through an opening in the hedge that she knew, before the gardener had a chance to see her face. But Felicity remained, caught by the gardener. "Huh," grunted the gardener. "That one has escaped, whoever she is, but we shall soon know her name. You shall tell us that, and other things, you minstrel lass."
"That I will never tell you,"
cried Felicity. "Huh, we shall see about that too," retorted the gardener in a surly voice. "You shall not escape, madam. I will take you to my lady the princess, and you will have a chance to explain how you came to be here playing the lute in her garden at a forbidden hour. Come along." And he advanced to seize Felicity by the collar. He was a huge, burly fellow, almost a giant in size. But Felicity laid her hand on her sword and said,
"Keep back, gardener, and do not attempt to lay hands on me. I promise to follow wherever you may lead, but you shall not touch me to make me a prisoner."
"Huh, a valiant minstrel," sneered the gardener. But he looked twice at the stranger's flashing eyes, and at her strong right arm, and at her sword, and decided to accept the promise. At once he led the way through the winding paths of the garden until they came to the palace gate. Now Felicity was shut into a dark dungeon to wait the hour when the princess was wont to hold council, to listen to the prayers of her suitors and the wishes of her people. Poor Felicity.
"This is the end of my happy time,"
she said to herself.
The princess will now dismiss me, if she does no worse. She will have no charity for a trespasser in her garden, of which she is so jealous. I may not tell her how her fair maiden met me there, and urged me to remain. No, I cannot tell, for that might bring trouble upon the flower maiden, whom, alas, I may never see again.
So she mused, wondering wistfully that she could have left without a word. But there was no blame in her heart. She already loved her so very dearly. It was afternoon when the gardener opened the cell of Felicity and bade her follow to the great hall of the palace, where the princess would hear her crime and appoint her punishment. With a heavy heart, she followed, down the white marble corridors, on the heels of the giant gardener, who muttered to himself as they went. Now and then he would turn to look at Felicity and shake his head, as though foreseeing for her some dreadful punishment. At last they came to a great hall, carpeted with green, with ceilings of blue, while the walls were of rosy pink. At the further end of the hall was a throne of gold, and upon it sat the Princess Floret. But Felicity dared not lift her eyes to look at her. She walked slowly down the hall after the gardener, and they took their stand near the throne, but behind the first rank of people. These were the gaily dressed attendants upon a great prince, who had come that day to woo the princess. Even at that moment, the herald was calling out his names and titles. Fortemain, Prince of Calabria, Knight of the Silver Feather, Captain of 100 spears. The Prince Fortemain himself bowed before the throne, while his attendants stood behind him, bearing most wonderful gifts for the royal lady. There were caskets of jewels, pieces of rich silks and ermine fur, singing birds in cages, little monkeys, and other curious pets from far lands. There were never finer presents than those which the Prince Fortemain brought to the Princess Floret. A chorus of oohs went up from the maids of honor when they saw the richness of these gifts. But Felicity dared not even look up to see if her flower maiden was among the white-robed band. She feared to betray the maiden to the fierce eyes of the gardener, who was watching everything closely. The prince made his speech very prettily, offering the princess his heart and hand, and all his riches, as well as his kingdom beyond the seas, to which he hoped to carry her. Then the princess spoke in answer, very gently, and the sound of her voice was like music in the hall. I have no wish to leave my own little kingdom of flowers, she said. "I am happy and contented here. I have no wish to exchange hearts, save with him who understands mine well. Let him find it where it is already bestowed, among my flowers. Choose my favorite flower, dear prince, and I am yours." At the sound of her voice, Felicity started, and for the first time looked up. There she sat upon the golden throne, her own dear flower maiden, she who had met her for 3 mornings in the garden. But now she wore no coarse gown of green. She was robed all in white, from her head to her feet, which were shod with gold. A golden girdle she wore, and a golden band confined her golden hair. She glanced at Felicity as she spoke the last words to the prince, and Felicity was sure that her eyes twinkled. Instantly, a bold thought came into her head, for she was a bold lass. She had been brought to the princess as a trespasser, ready for punishment. She would remain as a suitor. This princess was her dear, beloved flower maiden. She could not, she would not lose her. Had the princess not thrice called Felicity a princess? Felicity resolved she would woo her then, like any prince. But now the princess was speaking again, and this time she looked straight at Felicity. "Whom have we here, good gardener?" she asked, trying to force a little frown. "A trespasser, your highness," answered the gardener in his gruff voice, hustling Felicity to the foot of the throne. "A trespasser whom I found in your royal garden this morning at a disgustingly early hour, sitting with a fair maiden among the lavender, strumming on a lute. I saw not the face of the girl, but I fancy she must be one of your own maids of honor, who also should be punished for listening to the music of this wicked lass." A little cry of horror arose from the group about the princess, as they looked at one another, wondering who the shocking early riser could be. The princess looked sharply at Felicity and said, "Tell us the name of the maiden who was with you in the garden, and you shall be pardoned of your grievous fault." Felicity looked up at the princess and said gently,
"Lady, I will tell her name to you, and to you alone if you ask it, though I think that you guess it already. But first, I pray you, hear my suit, for I also have come hither as a suitor."
At these words, the princess started, and her cheek flushed. The gardener seized Felicity by the arm to drag her away, but Floret made a sign for him to stand back. "Let the stranger speak," she said, "and let her show, if she can, why, instead of being punished, she should be welcomed as one of our suitors." Then Felicity bowed down on the lowest step of the throne and laid at her dear maiden's feet her sword and her lute and the scrip or little pocket which she wore at her side. And she said,
"Fair princess, I come with scanty gifts and with no attendants, poor and alone. But all that I have, I offer you. My sword for your protection, my music for your joy, my little learning for your aid in sickness and in health. To atone for my boldness in forcing your garden gate, I offer the service of all these for as long as you will have them. And withal, I offer my merry heart, as true and faithful as that of any prince in the world, but more loving than any."
At this saying, the Prince Fortemain pushed forward indignantly. And he said, "You shall not listen to these idle words, O princess. This woman has no right to speak thus to you. She is no prince. She is but a wandering minstrel, a wanton woman, and vagabond. Let her be flogged from the gates for her impertinence." "Aye, let her be flogged away," echoed the gardener and others, and they jostled forward as if to seize Felicity. But Felicity still knelt at the feet of her flower maiden and was not at all afraid. The princess rose and sternly commanded her people to be quiet. Then she spoke to Felicity, and the anger was gone from her voice. "It is true, you are not royalty," she said. "What have you to say in reply to this prince's word?"
"Am I not royalty?"
she answered, looking her straight in the eyes.
"The fairest princess in the world has thrice named me princess, princess of minstrels, princess of doctors, princess of teachers. Does not that make me royalty indeed?"
There was silence in the hall at this bold answer. Then Floret beckoned to her wise man of the court, a wise man dressed all in black, with a long white beard and hair like silver thistledown. "O wise man, if a princess gave her these titles, is she, indeed, a princess?" she asked, and her voice was eager. The wise man thought for a little time, then nodded gravely thrice. "Aye, my princess, so it is written in the book of true chivalry. If she has been so honored, she is indeed and in degree a princess." "Nay," cried the Prince Fortemain, "I say nay. If she wishes to declare her suit, she must indeed be a prince by every declaration in the book of true chivalry. And she has not also been named the Princess of Courage. The book of true chivalry declares that he is no very prince who cannot do battle nobly for his lady's sake."
"That I will gladly do,"
said Felicity eagerly.
"I can wield a sword as well as any prince alive."
The cheeks of the princess glowed brightly. "Let her prove it, Prince Fortemain," she cried. "You shall punish her for her fault, and for her boast, if her words prove false. But if she bear herself the better man, she shall be called a worthy suitor like yourself, and shall have an equal chance with you." Fortemain grumbled and looked sulky, for he felt ashamed to fight with a woman adventurer. But since the princess so commanded, there was nothing for him but to obey. He drew his jeweled sword, and Felicity lifted her plain one from where it lay on the step of the throne. The courtiers made a ring around the two, and the bout began. 1, 2, 1, 2. The bright blades flashed, and the two fighters turned one about the other, seeking each the advantage. They were both skillful fencers, but the watchers soon saw that Felicity was the better. Dexterously she thrust, and warily she parried. At last, with a sudden jump and twist, she sent the weapon spinning from the hand of Fortemain. Away across the hall it flew, and, with red face and scowling brow, the prince was forced to seek it where it fell. "Well done, well done!" cried the crowd, clapping their hands, forgetting the fault of Felicity in the wonder of her bravery. And "well done," cried Floret. "I, a princess, name you in addition to your other titles, the Princess of Courage. Arise, Princess Felicity. Your suit is answered thus, as I answer every prince who does me the honor to seek my hand. If you be the very princess for me, you will know where to find my heart. Seek it where it is hidden in my garden. My heart is with my favorite flower. Farewell, my princess and prince both. An hour before noontide tomorrow I will hold audience. Then who is to be punished and who is to be rewarded shall learn their fate." Saying thus, she rose, and, stepping lightly down from the throne, passed out of the hall. Immediately all the lords and ladies followed her, leaving the two suitors alone together. Then the Prince Fortemain scowled at Felicity, and Felicity scowled back at him, and they went out of the hall by opposite doors, for they loved not each other. Felicity was moving slowly away when the gardener approached and touched her on the shoulder.
"How now? Must I return to the dungeon as a criminal?"
asked Felicity, flushing red. But the gardener answered, "Nay, matters have changed, my lady. You seem no longer a trespasser, but a suitor. I do not understand how the seesaw has tilted so suddenly, but certainly you are to be lodged in no dungeon cell. My lady, the Princess Floret, has given orders that you be shown to a chamber as fine as that of the Prince Fortemain himself. Come with me, if it please you." Felicity was then taken to a little chamber, not high, but very pleasant, looking out upon the garden through a window latticed with vines. And the gardener said, "You are free to come and go," and left her with a low bow. Now, by the time all these things were finished, it was late in the day, and Felicity said to herself,
I will not search for the precious flower tonight. I know my dear flower maiden prefers the early morning garden, and among the freshly opened buds, which I have seen her caress so kindly, must be the one she loves the best. I will now seek sleep, for I am very weary. But early will I awaken tomorrow morning to seek the flower which is most dear to her.
So Felicity lay down on her bed and was soon asleep, dreaming sweetly of the morrow. For she nothing doubted but that she should find the right and only flower, since she loved the princess so dearly that she must at last read her secret. But the Prince Fortemain had no such peace of mind. He was wounded in his princely pride because of having been defeated by the woman minstrel. He could not sleep, but, resolving to be beforehand with Felicity, went out into the garden by night and sought high and low for the flower favorite of the princess. For he said to himself, "The precious time has been almost spent by that luckless fight, and by the hour when I arise tomorrow, it will be time to present myself before the princess." He was a lazy, loitering prince, which was one reason for his sour temper, I suppose. I must then find the flower tonight before that villainous woman does so. Up and down the flowery paths went Fortemain, in and out among the sleeping blossoms. Most of them had their eyes shut tightly, and he could not see how beautiful they were. At last, he came upon a white, heavy-scented tuberose gleaming in the moonlight, and it seemed to him the fairest of all. "Ha," he said, "this is the sweetest blossom. Surely this must be the favorite of the Princess Floret. I will pluck this, and tomorrow I will take it to her and claim her hand." He gathered the tuberose and took it with him to his chamber. But even then, the Prince Fortemain could not rest. The odor of the flower was heavy and sickening, and it gave him troubled dreams. All night wretchedly he tossed and turned, and there was no refreshment in his sleep. Felicity woke in the morning, fresh and happy and full of eagerness. She woke very early, earlier even than usual, when she had been wont to join the flower maiden in the garden. She began to think of her, and how she had looked at different times. She remembered her the day before among the lavender, and before that among the roses with their dangerous thorns. Once among the lilies, herself as pure and bright.
Surely,
she said to herself.
One of these three is her favorite flower.
And she lay, staring up at the ceiling, trying to remember which of all her posies the princess had seemed most to love.
Which one of them has her heart? How curiously she said it. My heart is with my favorite flower. Surely she meant something more by the words than the first thought which they bring. What did she mean?
At this moment, Felicity glanced toward the window, where the morning sunlight streamed in gloriously. The vines about the lattice trembled in a passing breeze. One of them, reaching out a slender tendril finger, seemed to beckon her. She half rose in bed, smiling at the thought. Lo, a little pink and white flower nodded at her over the windowsill. It was a morning glory. How pretty, how fresh, how fairy-like it was, with the dew in its cup, and with its little green leaves so graceful, like pointed hearts. Suddenly, Felicity sat straight up in bed. Those heart-shaped leaves, the heart of Princess Floret, her favorite flower. Was it not the morning glory? Now she remembered how she had first seen her peering in at the little arbor, herself a pink and white flower on a green stem, with the blossom in her golden hair. She remembered how she had kissed the little cups and called them her darlings. How could she ever have forgotten how dull she had been? She sprang from the bed and ran eagerly to the window. She stretched out her hand to the blossom, not to pick it. It was too early for that, but to caress it, for her maiden's sake. Looking out the window to do so, she heard a little laugh beneath the window, and, looking down, she saw the green flower maiden with whom she had met in the mornings, standing at the foot of the morning glory vine, on which her hand rested lovingly. She was looking up, but when she met her eyes, she turned and ran away, laughing softly as she disappeared from sight. The time passed, all too slowly for Felicity, but at last came the hour for the trial. The herald blew his trumpet, dun-da-dun-da-da, and the courtiers flocked to the hall to witness a ceremony, the like of which they had seen so many times before that they were bored at the very thought. But because Felicity had first come as a prisoner and was now a suitor for their lady's hand, they were somewhat more interested than usual in the day's decision. Weary with a heavy night and with evil dreams, the Prince Vortimain stood on one side of the throne with his white tuberose in his hand. But alas, the flower was as faded and weary-looking as himself. Plucked so early before the trial, all its fragrance and beauty were gone, and Vortimain's heart sank as he looked at it, wondering if, after all, it could be the princess's favorite flower. But it was now too late to select another. Indeed, He had but just risen when he heard the great bell toll its warning to be ready for the trial. He showed a hasty toilette and a mind as ill-prepared. Felicity, on the other hand, was as bright and brisk as the sun, whose rising she had seen. Her gown of green velvet was fair to view, and her eyes shone happily. In her hand she held a few inches of little vine, with leaf and tendril, and at the side a single pale pink blossom. The courtiers eyed it curiously. Most of them had never before seen a morning glory, and they tittered to think one should suppose so simple a flower could be the choice of a royal princess. Now the trumpet sounded again, and in came the Princess Floret, dressed in a beautiful robe of green silk, in which she looked more than ever like a wonderful flower. Mounted to her throne, looking down kindly upon her people, but merely glancing toward the two suitors who stood on either side of the dais. "Now, to the business of the day," she said. "I will listen to the choice which my two suitors have made. And you first, Prince Vortimain. How have you selected? Have you found the flower of my heart? Have you guessed my secret choice? And are you therefore to be my very ownest prince?" Prince Vortimain knelt at the foot of the throne and held out the withered tuberose somewhat ruefully. And he said, "This, my princess, is your favorite flower. I think all over the garden I sought, and I deemed it best of all. This queen of the night is less beautiful by day, but in the moonlight it was very fair and sweet. I think your heart lies in this flower. Give it to me to wear always, dear princess." He spoke beseechingly, for indeed he was sure he loved her very dearly. But the princess shook her head. "Not so, O prince," she said. "This flower of the night is not my dearest one. It is sweet, but its breath is heavy and cloying. It takes away sleep and fills the brain with stupor. Nay, you have not chosen wisely, as your own haggard looks show. You are not to be my love. You know not my heart. Farewell, Prince Vortimain." Then Vortimain rose and turned away, as so many princes had done before him. He went out of the palace very sadly, and was never more seen in that place. The princess turned next to Felicity. "And what has our princess of wanderers chosen?" she asked. "How well does Felicity know the heart of Floret?"
"I have chosen thus,"
said the lass, as she curtsied at the feet of the flower maiden, and held out to her the bit of vine with its frail blossom.
"The sweet and simple blossom of early morning, the favorite of the early riser. This has your heart, O my princess. See its heart-shaped leaf. Have I not guessed aright?"
Then the princess went down the steps of the throne and took the vine from the hand of Felicity and placed its flower in her hair. But her hand, holding the heart-shaped leaf, she placed within that of Felicity, and she said, "Princess Felicity, you have chosen well, because you know my heart, and because you love what I love. You have guessed my secret. You found my heart among the morning glories, and now it is yours forever. Take it, Princess Felicity, and with it my hand. I have yet to punish you for your fault in entering my garden at a forbidden hour. Your punishment shall be this. You shall, without reward, for a year and a day, be my minstrel, my soldier, my teacher, and my doctor. But from thenceforth forever, you shall be my very ownest princess, sharer of my kingdom of flowers. This is the doom and the decree which I pronounce." Then she kissed her very sweetly, and, leading her up to the throne, they sat down side by side upon the golden chairs. "Sing to them, my minstrel," said the princess, and Felicity sang, as Floret commanded, until the courtiers hugged one another for joy of her wondrous singing. She sang a song of Floret and her heart like a flower, but she sang not the story of the flower maiden, for that was a secret between herself and the Princess Floret, while they lived happily ever after. From that time forward, each morning, Felicity and Floret stole down into the garden while the others were yet asleep, and enjoyed the flowers at their fairest, and no one, not even the surly gardener, suspected anything about it, which was the greatest fun of all to the merry pair. Nor did anyone ever hear aught of the tale until this day, when I tell it to you. But it was a morning glory which told it to me this morning, very, very early, while lazy folk were still in bed, asleep. I guess I didn't have to read the whole story, but I always want to make it to the ending. It's too sweet, living happily ever after.